Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. To jump now into the second segment around the trade scenario that happened a while ago, 3 years ago now, with the Houston Texans and the Cleveland Browns around Deshaun Watson. I'm sure if you can go back that far 3 years ago, I don't think anybody would have imagined at all what this trade would have turned out like it has right now. The Houston Texans and the Cleveland Browns back then in 2021, made that trade for Deshaun Watson with the whole, sexual misconduct being going on, the case going on with Deshaun Watson back then. Later, he was suspended for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy and the relationship that Deshaun Watson had going in with the Houston Texans. It all seemed a bit odd. I don't think anybody would have thought that this whole relationship would be fixed in the end. So because of that, there was a lot of trade talks with him. It really came down to the Cleveland Browns and the Atlanta Falcons at the time, and it looked like, Deshaun Watson with his roots in Atlanta, it seemed like that was going to be the destination for him, but he ended up going to the Cleveland Browns, and even before he had a snap played in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns, he and the Browns agreed to a massive 5-year, $230 million deal. All of that guaranteed, being the highest amount of money guaranteed to an NFL player in NFL history. You look at the trade, there was a lot of interchangeable pieces that went into it. The Browns obviously got Deshaun Watson and a pick or two, but in return, the Houston Texans got a lot back. As you see on your screen, I will break it down, but initially when it was announced, the Browns gave the Houston Texans a 2022 first-round pick and a fourth-round pick, a first-round pick, and a third-round pick in 2023, and a first-round pick and fourth-round pick in 2024. A total of 6 picks went to the Houston Texans for Deshaun Watson. And now, after all those years, 3 years, 4 years, the Cleveland Browns will finally have a first-round pick of their own next season in 2025. But looking at that in the moment, you could never have imagined what the Houston Texans will be now. From that point, to completely rebuild this team through essentially all of those draft picks to where they are now on the verge, or probably already as Super Bowl contenders, at least in my eyes, I'm sure in a lot of people's eyes. It's pretty remarkable what they did with these picks, just going through them in more detail year by year. In 2022, like I mentioned, they received pick number 13 and 104 from the Cleveland Browns, which they turned into one of their starting guards, Kenyon Green, with the 13th pick that they actually traded for the 15th overall pick, as well as 3 others in 2022. And they used those 3 other picks from the Philadelphia Eagles in that trade in 2022 to acquire their current wide receiver, John Mechie. They used a later pick to draft their linebacker, Christian Harris. And to round it off, they also drafted Thomas Booker and their starting running back for that time being Dameon Pierce. A pretty good haul in 2022, but that's only the start of this whole trade process that went down with the Houston Texans and the Browns. Moving on to 2023, they received pick number 12 and 73 from the Cleveland Browns, and with the 12th overall pick, that was traded to the Arizona Cardinals along with the Houston Texans' 33rd overall pick and this year's first round pick. Number 27 ended up being Darius Robinson. If you recall from last week, that was the second pick the Cardinals had in the first round, originally belonging to the Houston Texans. Now the Cardinals used it to draft Darius Robinson. But with that number 3 overall pick that they acquired from their trade with the Arizona Cardinals, they obviously drafted Will Anderson, the Defensive Rookie of the Year this past year. And they also received pick number 105 from the Arizona Cardinals, which they ended up getting defensive back Kalen Bullock through a trade as well. And to round it off with pick number 73 that they had from the Cleveland Browns as well in that trade for Deshaun Watson, they traded that to the Los Angeles Rams to acquire pick 161 in 2023 and move up a few spots for the 69th overall pick, which ended up being their current star wide receiver Tank Dell, on the way to a very impressive breakthrough season before he injured his ankle. But again, they had another bona fide starter now picked in that draft from one of the picks they acquired from the Cleveland Browns. And then finally this year, they still had pick number 23 and pick number 123 from the Cleveland Browns. And I'm sure if you follow the draft, you know that pick number 23 was traded to the Vikings. They used that pick to move up to draft Dallas Turner in that trade with the Jaguars. But essentially, in this year's draft, with those picks and going through all the trades, they were able to acquire Kamari Lassiter, the defensive back, Jamal Hill at pick 188, and Minnesota's second-round pick in 2025 as well now belongs to the Houston Texans. So a massive haul that they got from all these picks from the Cleveland Browns. They also drafted Cade Stover as well with a trade with the Philadelphia Eagles for that 123rd overall pick. They were able to draft Cade Stover as well. So you look at that and you're thinking you have about 6 to 7 players that you acquired there from just these draft picks that you turned into unquestionable starters for your team. And on the other side, you have Deshaun Watson, at the time, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You know, during his time in Houston, a lot of the narrative was that he is really just carrying the team. The Houston Texans didn't do much to supply him with the necessary help that he needed. So the relationship didn't really work out, and he was looking for a trade, landed with the Cleveland Browns. And at the time, it might not have looked great with the pieces that they had around him, but now you look at this Cleveland Browns team and what they gave up to acquire Deshaun Watson. It's looking not too bad for Deshaun Watson. You know, I'm trying to find the words to phrase it just because looking at this Browns team now and how loaded they seem to be with that defense, arguably a top 3 defense. You know, you have Chubb in your backfield. You have David Njoku, who has really broken out this past season, especially heading into the playoffs. You have Amari Cooper. That offensive line is very good. You acquired Jerry Jeudy as well. And then you look at Deshaun Watson, and it just hasn't really clicked in his 2 full seasons that he's been there. He's only been able to play 12 games, has a 60% completion percentage, has only thrown for 2,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. Doesn't really match up with paying him $230 million guaranteed, and also, you know, being that starter for this Cleveland Browns and trading so much of your equity in draft to the Houston Texans, comparing them and bringing up this what-if scenario. You know, what if this trade never really happened? What if you went to the Atlanta Falcons and their current quarterback would have been Deshaun Watson? How would that have turned out? Where would the Cleveland Browns be? I know they obviously needed a quarterback at that time. They were in dire need of one. And Deshaun Watson, you know, you can't predict the future. And in hindsight, this looks very lopsided, obviously, as you can see on your screen. But at the time, it's hard to really crucify the Browns for making this trade. You know, desperation can cause you to make trades like this. And you could have never predicted the Houston Texans to be in this position. But credit goes to the Houston Texans for making this move and really taking that jump to trade away their franchise, essentially. He was the face of the Houston Texans. And to go from Davis Mills being your starting quarterback and just everybody having no expectations for this Houston Texans team, all the issues they had in their front office, their general manager, they're figuring out their coaching situation. You bring in a rookie in DeMeco Ryan, and then you draft C.J. Stroud as well, another rookie, putting a lot on his plate, a lot of expectations. To turn around in 3 years, 4 years like it has right now, I can't think of another full rebuild situation like the Houston Texans that turned around this quickly. And it all could have been a lot different if the Texans decided, you know what, we're gonna stick with Deshaun Watson as the safe option, and we're just gonna live with him carrying us these next few years. That's a safe option. Credit goes again to the Texans for making that jump, not being overly safe with what they do. You look at them in free agency as well, being overly aggressive and going out and trading for Joe Mixon, acquiring Danielle Hunter, and just going out even as well trading for Stephon Diggs, making that sort of blockbuster trade. Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans have had a great mindset in trying to rebuild this team. It's that kind of mindset that, gets these teams to one year they're bottom of the division, bottom of the conference, to now remarkably turning into this Super Bowl contending team. A lot of credit, of course, goes to CJ Stroud as well. Nobody could have predicted him having the kind of season that he did. As a number 2 overall pick, even with that, it's still hard to tell with these quarterbacks. You look at the 2021 draft, even the 2022 draft, a lot of those guys just haven't panned out. To have struck gold like you did with CJ Stroud, that also plays into it. And it's just crazy to think about now. Just one decision, how that could have altered all of this for the Texans and the Browns. But overall, it just hasn't been good enough sticking with the Cleveland Browns from Deshaun Watson. And now at this point, because of you comparing it to the Houston Texans and just weighing out the rewards that the Texans got from making this trade compared to the Browns, it looks very lopsided, and I believe it is, but I think there's still time for Deshaun Watson to kind of right the ship a little bit. It definitely hasn't been what anybody thought it could be, but they have the weapons there. They have everything that he needs. Now this year, you're getting Nick Chubb back healthy, hopefully, off of that knee injury. You have David Njoku kind of stepping out of his shell and becoming a great tight end. Amari Cooper can still give you something. You bring him some help with Jerry Jeudy. Offensive line is great. Defense is, like I said, top 3 with a generational player like Myles Garrett. They have everything in an AFC conference where you need all of these things to compete. All you really need, most of all, is the quarterback, and Deshaun Watson is definitely not, done. He's not washed up. It's not like there's no hope for him, but I think now you're getting to the point, this breaking point with the Browns, where everybody's hyping up the Texans as a constant reminder of this trade and how lopsided it is. It's going to come to a point where if Deshaun doesn't give you more than what he is doing, it's going to get very loud in Cleveland with those fans wanting to have success with the team that they have. It's going to get very loud, and it's going to get very negative to a point with Deshaun Watson if he doesn't change this around. But I believe that he can do it. He's on a massive contract, so that also gets a lot of people talking about how your play is on the field. Currently, he has a salary cap number of almost $64 million for the Browns. The Browns are reportedly likely to try and rework that, obviously, but all that plays into more pressure, I guess I would say, for Deshaun Watson this coming year because of this trade, and now it finally being done with. The Browns can move on. People look at this, analyze this, and right now it looks bad, but definitely the Browns can do something to try and get the most out of Deshaun Watson for what they're paying him and for what they gave up in the end. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out starting this year in 2024. But in the meantime, we will move on and continue on with today's show. More on the Raiders and the draft talk, like I mentioned before. Sticking with the Raiders, how they ended up landing on Brock Bowers. How did one of the most talented guys in the NFL draft land all the way to 13 into the lap of the Las Vegas Raiders? I'll tell you more on that situation and just my reaction to it all, breaking down as it did after the break. So stick around because you're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.